You've just started drafting the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and you need some help identifying how to draft the best archetypes. We've got you covered.
Welcome to the MTG Rebellion. I'm FourStar, your lead drafter. Let's take a quick look at the draft metagame going into week 1 of Ixalan. Okay, so in week 0, we gave you guys our tentative list of the tiers as far as the draft archetypes. After jumping into the early streamer access, thank you for that, and doing a whole bunch of drafts already, these have shifted a little bit. So, pardon me, Is It Treasure is still amazing. I think this is the best deck in the format if you can get it. The payoffs are always there, and the blue and red cards at common are just insane. Gruul Dinos, which we're going to touch on later today, I think is still very, very good. It's just efficiency all across the board, but there are a few quirks with it, which we'll make sure you are aware of so you draft it correctly. Azorius Craft has shot up here very close to the top. This deck, I just think, might be my favorite one by the end of the format. It's just so fun to play. You just do things every turn, and then your value overwhelms your opponent. Tier 2, Rakdos Descend, Dimir Descend, and Golgari Fungal Descend have all kind of settled right here. They're middle of the road. They're not really great. They're not really bad, but you can still win with them. Orzhov Vamps, I'm waiting to see somebody build it correctly. Haven't seen that yet, so we're still middling in the middle. And of course, down at the bottom, Explore, way worse than I thought it was. I think a lot of folks have this opinion, but it just doesn't do a whole lot. The Explore mechanic is very good, but it's just not very good in blue-green. One of these days, we'll get a good blue-green payoff set. The Selesnya counter decks, if you don't have the uncommons, your deck flounders, and the Boros aggressive deck can be fine, but you're not necessarily winning because of the rares. You're winning because of the bomb commons that you have. So
Now, Azorius Craft, I mean, that jumped up from what we thought was a trap, a tier 3, all the way up to tier 1. I talked to Darth Zero a little bit about it. He said it is the grindiest archetype he's ever had.
it is grindy. This format is a lot more grindy than a lot of people thought it was, and you just get value over and over and over again. And so many of these aggressive decks just literally hit your artifact wall, and you just overwhelm them in time.
Fair. I'll tell you what, let's put a minute on the clock, and let's talk about the general rules of Jurassic Park, a.k.a. Gruul Dinos.
Let's do it. So, as a general strategy in most limited formats, early removal is at a premium. In dinosaurs, it's exactly the same way. Your deck is a little bit slower to get off the ground until you finally take over with your gigantic dinosaurs. So, above costed bodies are going to be in here. You're going to be playing a lot of 4s, 5s, and 6s, maybe even some 7s. And these things are going to be very hard to kill on their own. So, you'll eventually take over the game. You just need to stick a powerful threat and hope it isn't removed on curve. Now, that's a good thing in this set because the removal is not as abundant as it was before, and it's not as powerful. And the fight and pump mechanics in this set are going to be very, very powerful, which we'll jump on as well. Pump spells that give trample are at a premium. Most of the time, I always talk down on these things like Titanic Growth and stuff like that, but that's because they don't give trample or pseudo evasion. In this set, there are gnome tokens and little things running around that chump you for days. You have to be able to pump and trample over them to actually close the game before you get tempoed out on the backswing. And in mirror matches or against like the big black green decks, the biggest thing left alive usually wins. So you just keep playing threats, you tax the removal spells, and then eventually they run out, and whatever's left kills them.
Now, do we lose with the Dino strategy? There isn't a lot of card advantage. Do we lose if there's like a one-for-one removal strategy that can ignore some of our early drops?
You would, however, again, like I said, the removal that is premium to remove your critters is not as abundant, so it's not necessarily the biggest problem.
Gotcha. I'll tell you what, let's move it right along and get into what we call the Eggs of Wisdom.
So, eggs of wisdom here, general tips to remember when you're doing this. As a general rule, land cyclers are slow and inefficient. There are a few that have some pretty big payoffs, and there is a backdoor like reanimator deck where you want to cycle and reanimate, but dinosaurs is not in that world. So land cyclers are probably not where you want to be. Ramping is always good. You've got 1 and 2 mana ramp spells, being able to accelerate out the spore frogs. Even the buried treasure is kind of a pseudo lotus petal that you can get value out of later, but being able to cast your big things a turn earlier matters in this format. Artifact and enchantment removal is almost a main deck card, almost a requirement. So many of the bombs, probably 60-70% of the bombs are artifact or enchantment based. And if you cannot remove these things, you will lose the game in short order. The blue-white craft deck, the mural, is one prime example of it. It poops 4/4s over and over again. And if you cannot remove it, you will lose. Disenchant effects, same kind of thing. You get value out of it. There's always a target. That's why the hammer is one of the better equipments in white. Prioritizing your types of removal, the removal spells early on are almost better than the ones later. The good thing about dinosaurs is you've got a lot of punch spells. So punch spells as opposed to fights, you don't actually care if your guy is the same size or bigger. It just deals its power. So as long as your guy is alive, it just deals its damage and you can attack through. So you can kill death touch blockers and then attack through them.
Fair. Now, when we talk about these artifacts, these enchantment bombs, are there any in particular you look at and you're like, this is the one I need for Gruul Dinos?
The one that really stands out to me were, I guess, the two. There is a enchantment where that whenever you cast an artifact, it makes a 3/1 dinosaur token, and whenever you attack with a dinosaur on the same enchantment, it makes a treasure. So that one is pretty good. You don't have a lot of enchantments and artifacts to trigger it, but just getting the treasure off of attacks can help you ramp into your other things as well. The galleon, the big pirate ship that deals 5 damage when it comes in and cruise for 2, is also a very, very good card, but you're more looking for creatures and interactive spells as opposed to artifacts and enchantments.
Fair. Well, let's get things started. Let's look at the top 10 commons in Gruul Dinos.
Yep. So these commons are very, very powerful. Cavern Stomper. A lot of people don't like this card, but most people are used to 6 mana 6/6s. This is a 7/7 that gets you to scry. The secondary ability can be relevant later in the game. This kind of has a built-in trample ability because you can make sure that it can't get chunked by gnome tokens and whatnot. Uh, this format, it's pretty easy to remember. See a braid, draft a braid. This is one of the best removal spells printed in this set, and its functionality is great because it bolts and it destroys the artifacts all built into one. The Panic Altosaur, I've run into a lot. I've won many games just casting 1 or 2 of these, sitting there, them not being able to attack me, and just to them every end step until they die. Burning Some Cavalry is probably one of the only bears that I actually like in this archetype. The other one that gives trample is kind of a letdown because you don't have anything early you really want to trample anyway. This thing just lives as a 3/3 in your deck. Final Strike is a punch spell that is always good. The Malamute Veteran is just a good quality thing. Trample is why it's on this list. The Dynamaton Menace, pseudo evasion, is always very good. You can just chunk somebody with it. Plundering Pirate, kind of like see Plundering Pirate like a braid, you take it. This card is one of the better ramp spells and it just does everything early in the game. Rock Slide, you don't want too many of these, but it still is a good way to be able to pick off a 5 or 6 drop. And the Armored Kincaller I really value because you need to stay alive until you start casting your 6s.
Fair. Now, we covered those 10 pretty quickly, but let's look at the grander scope. Are there cards that are just outside of this top 10, some role players that you are very okay drafting?
There are, and they say trample on them. There
Okay.
is the +3/+3 and gives trample is a premier combat trick in this format. Like I said, you need to be able to punch through that last part of damage before you get cracked back. Also, there's a +2/+2 that also lets you destroy an artifact if it deals damage to them, which is also very, very good. Being able to punch through damage and get value. There's so many random artifacts lying around, a critter or a bigger thing that you can just pop. So that's also things that would make the list.
Fair enough. Now, let's move on to the uncommons because these tend to be more signposty on letting you know,
Mhm.
is this archetype actually viable?
Yep. So the uncommons in dinosaurs, these guys really are going to be the ones that are not necessarily amazing, but they're going to pull you into this archetype. The Lore Keeper is literally built for dinosaurs. This is an elf, but you need to have the dinosaurs, or this card is just a 1/1 that does nothing in your deck. The Diamond Pickaxe is very, very powerful. It's actually one of the better cards in the blue red pirate deck as well. But just being able to pump your guy and ramping, this is kind of a pseudo backdoor way to do it. The Raptor, amazingly enough, this thing does 4 damage almost every time it resolves, if not 8 damage. This shuts off your opponent's combat tricks, counter spells, anything else if this is in play. It hits hard, it hits early, and is good for at least 8 damage. The Battle Glyph, for those of you who've been playing for a long time like I have, this is a hunt the week, but it is a lot cheaper. It used to be 4 mana, now it is 1. So if you can have your opponent tap out, you play a gigantic guy, they tap out to play something else, you can kill the guy and be pretty safe. Your guy's going to survive. Thrashing Bronodon is above rate already, and being able to throw it to destroy a bomb is always great. Colossal Dactyl is one of my favorite cards in this set. 4-mana 4/4s are awesome. This is a 4-mana 4/5 with has two very relevant abilities: Trample and Reach. This thing is a wall and a half. This thing sucks removal early, and if it doesn't, you just attack them and win the game. Triumphant Chomp is a dinosaur shock. You want it all the time. Yearling and the Dreadmaws are good role players, and Glimpse is one of those ramp spells that we mentioned before. Being able to get to 2 to 4 matters.
Now, I assume there's going to be scenarios where we see an uncommon dino and then we see like a braid or another piece of removal. Which do we prioritize typically?
Removal 80% of the time. Literally, the only ones that I would even take a look at are one of the signpost dinosaurs. There's a 2/3 haste for 2 that is a removal spell built into it, and a colossal dactyl. I might take over a lot of that stuff, but other than that, no. Removal is going to be at a premium.
Fair. Well, let's move on. We've combined the mythics and the regular rares. Let's talk about them.
You bet. So again, as we mentioned before, poetic ingenuity is the enchantment here that can make dinosaur tokens. You just get a whole bunch of value over time from all of your crafting things that you might have lying around. Breaches the pillager. This 3/3 slices, dices, does everything. This is a first pick in almost any pack you see it. If this thing lives, the game ends in very short order. The Galleon is just a very good middle of the game cards. It kills almost everything in this set. Dracosaur. There's not much left to be said about this. Wizards, what were you thinking? This card does everything. If this thing lives, you win target game. It's that simple. The 4/4 here, this is one of the worst of the Ogier grouping, but it's still a 4/4 that can come back over and over again. And if you have smaller removal spells, this will make up the difference. The other guy down here, the Intrepid Paleontologist, is just a solid ramp guy. I haven't got to cast dinosaurs off of it yet, but those were games I was already winning anyway. But just color fixing ramp, this is just a bigger frog that has some value, and you might be able to get something before they can reanimate it. The Sentinel, if this thing lives, it gets out of hand very quick. Even if they miss, they're hitting their land drops, and they're going to pull away from you in the game. Hulking Raptor, I've drafted twice. Amazing card. This is the Vineyard on a ward body. This thing attacks really hard and it goes from 4 to 7 very, very quick. Huatli, I lost to in the sealed release event. If this thing flips, you're dying. It does everything, and the green Ogier is just a better version.
So when we look at those rares, one of the things I'm not seeing is Polani Hatcher. Is there a reason that doesn't make the top 10 over maybe the red Ogier?
Polani's Hatcher, I haven't been too impressed with. The reason is because of the toughness. It is an X3, and when a Braid is one of the premier removal spells in the format, it makes the egg at the beginning of combat. So as soon as you play this thing, you might get 1/3/3 out of it, but this thing just eats in a Braid immediately, and then you don't get value out of it, and there's no real way to get value out of the eggs later in the game. So it's probably number 11 on the list, and I'd rather just have a 4/4.
Fair. Well, let's look at, I believe, the signposts.
You bet. So these signposts are not necessarily the best cards in the archetype, but these are ones that are going to make you think, oh, okay, I want to try and draft dinosaurs first. The Hammer Skull is awesome. This thing will almost never have a stun counter on it, and even if it does, you can do it early, or this thing just sits in blocks. This is the goalie of goalies. It just blocks everything in the format. Triumphant Chomp, you get the payoff if you're in the dinosaur deck, so obviously you want to try and do that. The Yearling, this is kind of like an Eldrazi Mimic, where if you can play it on curve, it's already a good above rate guard, but if you can do this into like a 4/4 and the 5/5, this thing just ends the game very quick. Dracosaur, I'm going to want to play red in most of these decks anyway, and this is just a reason that I'm going to be playing dinosaurs or a red-based deck. The Hatcher, again, it's okay, but this is the deck where you obviously want it because it makes dinosaurs thing. You can randomly make 6/6s with haste later in the game, assuming this survives. The Dreadmaw, it's a signpost because you get more value the more dinosaurs you have. This thing can draw 4 cards pretty easily. Mana Ramp, Hulking Raptor, Poet, any of the dinosaur payoffs, anything that is just green or red that's powerful, you want to at least consider going into this archetype. Now, some of these are splashable, the Hammer Skull, the Dracosaur, things like that, but this is really where you want to be as far as dinosaurs go.
Fair. Now, looking at these, are there any that cause you to want to pivot colors in pack 3, pick 1? If you just open a bomb, do any of these make you pivot?
The only one that you could consider splashing is the Hatcher, but the Dracosaur, I might start playing red just because of that, because it almost color fixes by itself.
So it's got that level where you look at it kind of like Hullbreaker Horror was once upon a time, where you see it and you're like,
It
I
just
guess we're in
has
red now. Just like
it has
that.
a gigantic sign that says "Draft me if you know what you're doing." That's all it says.
Fair, fair. Well, let's talk a little bit about the traps that are in dinos.
You bet. So, Sunfire Torch is going to shock a lot of folks that I have this on the trap list. This is a very very powerful card, but it underperforms in my experience in the dinosaur deck. You don't have a lot of early creatures to put this on and throw it, or at least early on that you want to be trading. I don't want to prioritize putting bad bears in my deck just so I can have this early to kill things early. The Hotfoot Gnome I really thought was going to be a lot better in this deck, but one, toughness is very, very bad, and you have a lot of other things that could randomly give haste to your things, so I'm not really in the market for this. The caves, if you have some cave payoffs, they're okay, but Sorcery Speed Discover 4, not really where I want to be. I want to be able to be tapping out every turn and be able to try and play a guy and catch them with a fight spell. You can play these as value lands, but I'm not really the biggest impressed. I wouldn't try to get these. The falter effects, never really been impressed with. You have a lot of trample effects that you can do the same kind of thing on, and again, the land cyclers are probably pretty bad. So I would play this if I have to, but I'm not looking to.
Fair. So if we look at this, there's only 6 trap cards. Does this mean that a majority of each color is just like decent to fill in the open slots in the archetype if you don't draft enough of the signposts and top 10 commons, uncommons, rares?
That's kind of what I've been loving about this format is even if your draft is a 6, it can still play like a 7 or an 8. A lot of the cards are interchangeable, and it's just a matter of being able to play sequence and curve out more often than not. If you curve out, you're going to win games even if you have worse cards.
Fair. And that concludes our week 1 draft guide covering the meta and Gruul Dinos. So comment below, let us know your thoughts, and while you're down there, please remember to like, subscribe, and share us with your friends. We even have a join button for those who can afford to support the Rebellion for just 99 cents a month.
Tune in next week as we break down another viable archetype in Lost Caves of Ixalan draft.
And until next time, untap, upkeep, resist.